My name is Luis Anderson, and at 67, I thought I had life figured out. After retiring as a bank manager, I wanted nothing more than to support my son Aaron and his wife Julia, especially after losing my Margaret. They were living in the house I bought them, building their lives together. I never expected to overhear those cutting words from my daughter-in-law. "That old man is only good for paying our bills." The worst part? My son just laughed along. If you're watching this video, let me know where you're tuning in from, and hit that like and subscribe button as I share how I finally stood up for myself. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Pennsylvania, raised by parents who believed in the value of hard work and saving for the future. My father worked at the local steel factory for 40 years, never missing a day. My mother managed our household with precision, stretching every dollar until it screamed. They taught me that financial responsibility wasn't just about having money, but about respecting it. Those lessons served me well throughout my life. After college, I landed a job at First National Bank, starting as a teller and working my way up to branch manager over 40 years. Banking wasn't just a career for me, it was a passion. I loved helping families plan for their futures, teaching young couples about mortgages, and guiding retirees through their golden years. My colleagues often joked that I could smell a bad investment from a mile away. It was at a bank conference in Chicago that I met Margaret, the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. She worked for a competing bank, but had the most infectious laugh and brilliant mind for numbers. We spent that entire weekend talking about interest rates, and somehow, it was the most romantic conversation of my life. 6 months later, we were engaged, and within a year, married. Margaret and I built a wonderful life together. We weren't extravagant people, preferring to save for the future rather than splurge on luxuries. Our modest 4-bedroom home in the suburbs was paid off 15 years into our 30-year mortgage because we made double payments whenever possible. We drove reliable cars until they couldn't run anymore. Our one indulgence was travel, visiting a new state every anniversary until we had seen all 50. Our son Aaron came along 3 years into our marriage. From the moment he was born, we were determined to give him everything we hadn't had, but not without teaching him the value of hard work. As a child, Aaron earned his allowance by doing chores. In high school, he worked part-time at the local grocery store. Margaret and I were so proud when he was accepted to Cornell University on a partial scholarship. We had saved enough in his college fund to cover the rest without loans. Aaron met Julia during his junior year. She was studying fashion design and came from a family that, according to Aaron, had expensive taste. Their relationship moved quickly. Julia was charming, beautiful, and seemed to make Aaron happier than we'd ever seen him. When they announced their engagement after graduation, Margaret and I were thrilled, if a bit surprised by how quickly it happened. The wedding was an extravagant affair, far more lavish than Margaret and I had envisioned. Julia's parents contributed very little, explaining they were going through a tough time financially. Margaret and I covered nearly $90,000 in expenses, from the open bar to the 7-tier cake to the honeymoon in Bali. We didn't mind, though. Aaron was our only child, and we wanted his special day to be perfect. As a wedding gift, we purchased them a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Brookhaven, an upscale neighborhood with excellent schools. We had always planned to help Aaron with his first home, but had expected to contribute to a down payment, not buy the property outright. Still, we had saved diligently, and property was a solid investment. Aaron seemed overwhelmed with gratitude, and Julia hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, whispering that we were the parents she'd always wished for. 3 years ago, Margaret was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. Within 6 months, she was gone. The loss devastated me in ways I couldn't articulate. For 40 years, I'd never made a major decision without her input. Now I found myself alone in our house, surrounded by memories and silence. Aaron and Julia visited occasionally, but they were busy with their own lives. Julia had started a career as a social media influencer, constantly posting photos of their seemingly perfect life, while Aaron worked as a stockbroker, though from what I gathered, he wasn't particularly successful. In my loneliness, I found myself eager to help them whenever I could. I fixed things around their house, brought over home-cooked meals, and offered financial advice they rarely followed. I noticed they seemed to live well beyond their means, with Julia constantly showing off new designer clothes and Aaron driving a luxury car that cost more than his annual salary. Whenever I gently asked about their finances, Aaron would become defensive, insisting everything was fine. But it clearly wasn't fine. Despite living in a fully paid house with no mortgage, they were constantly complaining about money troubles. Julia would mention her friends' exotic vacations or new jewelry with naked envy. Aaron would sigh about his colleagues' bonuses. I began to wonder how they were managing, especially given their apparent lifestyle. It started small. About 2 years after Margaret passed, Aaron called me asking for advice about a credit card with a high interest rate. The conversation ended with me adding him as an authorized user on my premium card, just for emergencies, he promised. I thought it would help them build better credit while having a safety net. The card had a generous limit of $25,000, more than enough for any real emergency. The first month, Aaron used it for what seemed like legitimate purposes: a car repair when his vehicle broke down, and a plumbing emergency when their water heater failed. I was happy to help, and he promised to reimburse me when his next commission check came through. That check apparently never arrived, or if it did, the money went elsewhere. By the second month, I noticed charges from high-end restaurants, designer clothing stores, and electronics retailers. When I casually mentioned these to Aaron, he seemed surprised, blaming Julia for misunderstanding the purpose of the card. He assured me it wouldn't happen again, and I chose to believe him. By the third month, the pattern was clear. The card was being used for everyday luxury expenses, not emergencies. Charges from Gucci, Four Seasons hotels, and wine shops appeared regularly. I started receiving delivery notifications for packages I hadn't ordered, all going to Aaron and Julia's address. Then came the forgotten utility bills. Aaron called one evening, embarrassed, explaining that their electricity was about to be shut off because they had missed 3 payments. Could I help them catch up, just this once? Of course I agreed. What father wouldn't? The same happened with their water bill the following month, then their internet, then their property taxes. Soon I was paying not just their occasional utility bills, but their car insurance, cell phone plans, and even their grocery deliveries from premium organic markets. Each time Aaron promised it was temporary, that business was slow but about to pick up, that he was expecting a big client to sign any day now. "Dad, you know I'm good for it," he would say, his voice taking on the same tone he used as a teenager when asking to borrow the car. "Things are tight right now, but I've got some promising leads. I'll pay you back double when they come through." They never seemed to come through. Julia's social media presence grew, with tens of thousands of followers admiring her authentic luxury lifestyle. She never mentioned that this lifestyle was largely funded by her father-in-law. Instead, she positioned herself as a self-made success story, offering her followers tips on manifesting abundance and creating the life you deserve. The breaking point should have been the car, but even then, I gave in. Aaron's 3-year-old BMW was embarrassing him with clients, he claimed. He needed something more impressive, more successful looking. Could I help with the down payment on a new Mercedes? I suggested he wait until business improved, but he insisted this car would help him attract wealthier clients. I wrote a check for $30,000, telling myself it was an investment in his career. The truth was, I was afraid of saying no, afraid of the disappointment in his voice, afraid of being the father who didn't believe in his son's potential. My longtime friend Thomas, who had known Aaron since he was born, tried to warn me. Over golf one Saturday, he gently suggested that Aaron and Julia were taking advantage of my grief and loneliness. "Luis, I know you miss Margaret, and helping Aaron makes you feel connected to her," he said, carefully lining up his putt. "But would she approve of how they're treating you? Would she want Aaron to depend on you instead of standing on his own 2 feet?" I bristled at his words, defending Aaron with the blind loyalty of a father who couldn't admit his son had flaws. "He's going through a rough patch," I insisted. "The economy is tough for young people these days. Margaret would want me to help him." Thomas just shook his head, knowing better than to push further. "Just be careful," he said finally. "Make sure you're not enabling bad habits instead of actually helping." I dismissed his concerns, but a small voice in the back of my mind wondered if he might be right. Still, I continued to pay their bills, fund their lifestyle, and make excuses for their behavior. After all, what else did I have to spend my retirement savings on? Margaret and I had saved for a future together that would never come. At least this way, I was helping our son. Or so I told myself. The calls for financial help became more frequent, the reasons more flimsy. Julia needed $6,000 for a career-critical social media retreat. Aaron needed $4,000 for a client development golf membership. Their refrigerator, barely 5 years old, suddenly needed replacing with a smart model costing thousands. Each time, I wrote the check, transferred the money, or handed over my credit card. And each time, the promised repayment never materialized. Sunday had always been family dinner day when Margaret was alive. After her passing, that tradition faded away, like so many others. Still, I occasionally dropped by Aaron and Julia's house unannounced, bringing groceries or homemade food, hoping to recapture some sense of family connection. On this particular Sunday in April, I arrived earlier than usual, around 11 in the morning, with a pot of Margaret's famous beef stew and a fresh-baked apple pie. Their front door was unlocked, as it often was during the day. I let myself in quietly, planning to surprise them with an early lunch. As I set the food down in the kitchen, I heard voices from the living room. The sliding door was partially open, and Aaron and Julia clearly had no idea I had arrived. I was about to announce my presence when Julia's words stopped me cold. "That old man is only good for paying our bills," she said, laughing. The contempt in her voice was unmistakable. I froze, the pie still warm in my hands, as Aaron's response came through clearly. "He's so easy to manipulate," my son replied, chuckling. "All I have to do is tell him we're struggling, and he pulls out his checkbook. I don't think he even looks at the credit card statements anymore." My heart began pounding so hard I was sure they would hear it. I carefully set the pie down on the counter, my hands suddenly unsteady. "Remember when you convinced him we needed a new roof?" Julia said, her voice gleeful. "The contractor told us it was perfectly fine for another 10 years. "Well, we needed that money for Cancun," Aaron replied. What was I supposed to say? "Dad, can you fund our beach vacation because we spent our savings on Julia's handbags?" They both erupted in laughter, as casual as if they were discussing the weather, not the systematic exploitation of my generosity. "We should start planning for summer," Julia continued. "I was thinking the Bahamas this year, that resort with the private cabanas and personal chefs." "Great idea," Aaron agreed. "I'll tell Dad that I need to attend a financial conference there. He never questions anything related to my career development." "Look what arrived yesterday," Julia said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I inched closer to the door, barely breathing. "Is that the new Hermes bag? The one that costs more than some people's monthly salary?" Aaron asked, sounding impressed. "Put it on your dad's card," Julia confirmed proudly. "I told the sales associate it was a gift for my mother. They gift-wrapped it and everything." "You're terrible," Aaron said, but his tone was admiring, not admonishing. "Almost as terrible as those stories you make up for your dad," Julia replied. "The fictional client who lost your commission, the imaginary office expenses. You should have been an actor, not a stockbroker." "Well, Dad makes it easy," Aaron said, his voice suddenly serious. "He's so desperate to be needed that he never questions anything. Sometimes I almost feel bad about it." "Don't," Julia said firmly. "He's got plenty of money and nothing else to spend it on. Besides, he's not going to live forever, and then it will all be ours anyway." "True," Aaron agreed. "And the sooner we get him to update his will to exclude those charities Margaret was so fond of, the better." I had heard enough. Moving as quietly as I could, I picked up the food I had brought and slipped out the front door. Once safely in my car, parked down the street, I sat shaking, unable to drive for several minutes, as the full impact of what I'd heard washed over me. My son, my only child, the boy I had read bedtime stories to, taught to ride a bike, helped with homework, was systematically exploiting me. Worse, he was laughing about it with his wife, planning how to extract more money from me in the future, and even discussing my eventual death as a financial opportunity. I drove home in a fog of betrayal and disbelief. The food I had prepared with such care sat forgotten on the passenger seat. Once home, I went straight to my office and pulled out all my recent financial statements. With trembling hands, I began to go through them line by line. The evidence was overwhelming. In the past year alone, I had spent over $100,000 on Aaron and Julia's emergencies and necessities. The credit card I had given Aaron for emergencies showed charges from luxury retailers, exclusive restaurants, first-class airline tickets, and jewelry stores. I found evidence of purchases that had never been mentioned to me: designer watches, artwork, electronic gadgets. There were even charges for items that could only have been gifts for other people, including several expensive purchases from Julia's favorite luxury brand that coincided with her parents' anniversary and birthdays. Most disturbing of all was a pattern of cash advances, thousands of dollars withdrawn from ATMs, with no explanation of where that money had gone. Had Aaron developed a gambling problem? Was he in some kind of trouble he hadn't told me about? Or was this simply spending money, withdrawn to hide its eventual use from me? As night fell, I sat surrounded by papers, documenting my own financial exploitation, feeling more alone than I had even after Margaret died. At least then, I had believed I still had a son who loved me. Now, I wasn't sure what I had. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, replaying Aaron and Julia's conversation in my mind, analyzing every word, hoping to find some innocent explanation I had missed. There was none. Their contempt had been unmistakable, their manipulation deliberate and coordinated. As the first light of dawn filtered through my curtains, I thought about Margaret. What would she have said about this situation? She had always been Aaron's staunchest defender, seeing the best in him even when his behavior was questionable. But even Margaret had her limits. "Love doesn't mean being a doormat," she would say when faced with someone taking advantage of her kindness. I remembered the values we had tried to instill in Aaron: honesty, respect, work ethic. Somewhere along the way, those lessons had been forgotten or rejected. Had Julia changed him so completely? Or had these tendencies always been there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for an opportunity? Maybe I was partly to blame. After Margaret died, I had been so eager to stay connected to Aaron, so desperate not to lose another person I loved, that I had overlooked the warning signs. I had confused financial support with emotional connection, using my wallet to try to maintain a relationship that was clearly one-sided. By 7:30 that Monday morning, I had made my decision. If Aaron saw me only as a source of money, then money was where I would draw the line. Not out of revenge, but because continuing to fund his irresponsible lifestyle wasn't helping him become the man Margaret and I had raised him to be. My first call was to my bank. I spoke with Patricia, the branch manager who had taken over my position when I retired. I explained that I needed to make significant changes to my accounts immediately. "I need to remove Aaron Anderson as an authorized user on all my credit cards," I told her, my voice steadier than I expected. "Of course, Mr. Anderson," Patricia replied, her tone professional. "May I ask if there's been an issue? Any fraudulent charges we should investigate?" I considered the question. Were Aaron's charges technically fraudulent? He had permission to use the card, after all. The fraud was moral, not legal. "No fraud," I said finally. "Just a change in family circumstances." Next, I contacted each credit card company directly, explaining the situation and requesting immediate removal of Aaron's access. Most were efficient and understanding, completing the process within minutes. One representative, a young man named Derek, seemed to sense the emotional weight behind my request. "Sir, I just want to say I'm sorry you're going through this," he said gently. "I've seen similar situations before. You're doing the right thing, even though it's hard." His kindness nearly broke me. I thanked him, my voice thick with emotion, and ended the call. By 10 o'clock, Aaron's access to all my credit accounts had been terminated. I had also placed security alerts on all my accounts and changed the passwords and security questions for my online banking. My next call was to Frank Wilson, my financial advisor for the past 20 years. Frank had helped Margaret and I plan for retirement, set up Aaron's college fund, and navigate the financial aspects of Margaret's illness. He knew our family finances intimately. "Luis," he greeted me warmly. "Good to hear from you. How are things?" "Not great, Frank," I admitted. "I need your help making some significant changes to my financial arrangements." I explained the situation as objectively as I could, though I could hear the hurt creeping into my voice. Frank listened without interruption, then sighed heavily. "I'm sorry, Luis. I've seen this scenario more often than I'd like to admit. You're not alone in this experience." "What do you recommend?" I asked. "First, you've already taken the right steps with the credit cards," he confirmed. "Next, we should review your entire portfolio and estate plan. If Aaron and Julia are primarily interested in your money, we need to ensure they don't have access to any of it without your explicit consent." We spent the next 2 hours going through every aspect of my finances, from checking accounts to investments to retirement funds. Frank helped me implement additional security measures and suggested setting up new accounts at different institutions for any future income. "What about the house?" I asked eventually. "The one I bought for them." Frank paused. "That's more complicated. If the house is in their names, it's legally theirs, regardless of who paid for it. It's in my name," I explained. "I was planning to transfer it to them on Aaron's 35th birthday next year." "Then you still have control," Frank nodded. "But this is where you might need legal advice. Let me give you Jack Steinman's number. He's an excellent estate attorney who specializes in these kinds of family situations." By early afternoon, I was sitting in Jack Steinman's office in downtown Boston. Jack was a serious man in his 50s, with a direct manner that I appreciated in my emotional state. "Mr. Anderson, based on what you've told me, I recommend placing the house in a conditional trust," he advised after hearing my story. "This would allow you to establish specific terms under which Aaron and his wife can continue to live there, or eventually own it outright." "What kind of terms?" I asked. "That's entirely up to you," Jack explained. "You could require them to pay the property taxes and insurance. You could establish conditions related to employment or financial independence. You could even include requirements about family relationships, though those are harder to enforce legally." We spent the next several hours drafting the trust agreement. The terms were firm but fair. Aaron and Julia could continue living in the house rent-free, but they would be responsible for all utilities, maintenance, and property taxes. If they failed to meet these responsibilities for 3 consecutive months, ownership would revert to me, and I could sell the property or use it as I saw fit. Additionally, the house would only transfer to Aaron's ownership after 5 years of demonstrated financial responsibility, including maintaining steady employment and contributing to his own retirement fund. "This gives them a path to ownership," Jack explained, "but requires them to demonstrate the values you want to instill." I also revised my will and estate plan. Previously, Aaron had been the sole beneficiary of my entire estate. Now, I established a structured trust that would provide him with limited annual distributions rather than a lump sum inheritance. Half of my estate would go to charitable causes Margaret had supported, particularly cancer research and financial literacy programs for young adults. "These changes aren't punitive," I told Jack, trying to convince myself as much as him. "They're about helping Aaron grow into the person I know he can be." Many clients find that setting boundaries with adult children is the hardest thing they've ever done, Jack assured me. But in my experience, it's often the most loving choice in the long run. As evening approached, I had one final task to complete. I drove to a local electronics store and purchased a comprehensive home security system with cameras for each entrance. The young salesman helped me select a model that would send alerts to my phone and allow me to monitor my home remotely. "Planning a trip?" he asked cheerfully as he rang up the purchase. "No," I replied. "Just expecting some difficult conversations." Back home, I spent several hours looking through old photo albums. There was Aaron, on his 5th birthday, beaming as he blew out candles on a cake Margaret had spent hours decorating. Aaron at his high school graduation, standing tall in his cap and gown between Margaret and me, all of us full of hope for his future. Aaron on his wedding day, looking at Julia with such adoration that it hurt to remember it now. Where had that young man gone? Was he still in there somewhere, beneath the entitlement and manipulation? I wrote a letter explaining my actions, pouring out my disappointment and hurt, but also my enduring love and hope for reconciliation. I sealed it in an envelope, but didn't address it. I wasn't sure yet whether giving it to Aaron would help or just provide more ammunition for Julia's contempt. As I finally prepared for bed, physically and emotionally exhausted, my phone chimed with a text from Aaron. "Dad tried to use the card for dinner, but it was declined. Is everything okay with your account?" I didn't respond. The real conversation would come soon enough, and I needed to be rested and clear-headed when it did. The call came at 12:30 the next day, just as I was finishing a simple lunch of soup and sandwich. Aaron's name flashed on my phone screen, and I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello, Aaron," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Dad!" he exclaimed, his tone frantic. "Something's wrong with all the cards." Julia and I were at Vincenzo's with some important clients for lunch, and when we went to pay, every single card was declined. The waiter announced it in front of everyone, and people were staring and laughing. It was humiliating. "Can you check with the bank? There must be some mistake." I let the silence stretch for a moment before responding. "There's no mistake, Aaron. I removed you as an authorized user from all my accounts." The shocked silence on the other end was almost palpable. "You did what?" he finally managed, his voice a mixture of confusion and dawning anger. "Why would you do that without telling me?" Instead of answering directly, I opened my phone's photo gallery and selected the image of the house trust document I had signed yesterday. "I'm sending you something," I said, hitting the send button. "What is this?" he demanded after a moment. "Some kind of legal document? Dad, what's going on?" "I visited your house on Sunday morning," I said simply. "I heard you and Julia talking in the living room. I heard everything, Aaron." Another long silence followed, this one heavy with understanding. "Dad, whatever you think you heard, you misunderstood," he began, his voice taking on a placating tone I now recognized as his manipulation voice. "Julia and I were probably just joking around. You know how we like to tease each other. You were discussing your trip to Cancun," I replied steadily. "The one you funded by lying to me about needing a new roof." "That's taken out of context," he protested, but I could hear the panic rising in his voice. "Look, Dad, let's talk about this in person. I can explain everything." "And Julia's new Hermes bag? The one she charged to my credit card and told the sales associate was for her mother?" "That was a misunderstanding," Aaron insisted, but his excuses were growing weaker. "Dad, please, we need those cards. We have financial commitments, bills to pay." "Yes, I imagine you do," I agreed. "Bills for things you never needed and couldn't afford. So you're just cutting us off?" His voice turned angry. "After everything we've been through as a family? Mom would be ashamed of you." The mention of Margaret stung, but I held firm. "Your mother taught you better than to exploit people who love you, Aaron. I think she'd be more ashamed of how you've been behaving." "This is about Julia, isn't it?" he deflected. "You've never liked her. You're trying to punish me for marrying her." "This has nothing to do with Julia, and everything to do with your choices," I corrected him. "You chose to lie to me repeatedly. You chose to mock me behind my back. You chose to take advantage of my love for you." "Fine," Aaron snapped. "Keep your precious money. We don't need it anyway." The call ended abruptly as he hung up on me. I sat at my kitchen table, hands shaking slightly, but feeling strangely calm. The confrontation I had dreaded was over, and I had maintained my resolve. The calm didn't last long. Within minutes, my phone began buzzing with text messages from both Aaron and Julia. From Aaron, "You can't just change the house arrangement. We have rights." From Julia, "How dare you treat your son this way? You miserable old man." From Aaron, "I'm calling a lawyer. You'll regret this." From Julia, "All Aaron has ever done is love you despite your controlling behavior." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I turned off my phone notifications and spent the afternoon working in my garden, finding solace in the simple act of tending to my tomato plants and pulling weeds. Margaret had always said gardening was cheaper than therapy, and she wasn't wrong. Around 6 in the evening, my doorbell rang, followed by aggressive knocking. I checked my newly installed security camera to see Aaron and Julia on my porch, both looking furious. Aaron was pounding on the door and shouting my name. I watched through the camera as my neighbor, Harry Jenkins, stepped out of his house next door, concerned by the commotion. "Everything okay over there, folks?" he called to Aaron and Julia. "My father has lost his mind," Aaron shouted back. "He's in there but won't answer the door." Harry, a retired police officer who had known me for 20 years, approached cautiously. "Luis is one of the most level-headed guys I know," he said. "Maybe give him some space if he doesn't want to talk right now. He's probably having some kind of breakdown," Julia told Harry, her voice deliberately loud enough for any neighbors to hear. "He's been acting erratically since his wife died. We're worried about his mental state." I watched as Harry's expression turned skeptical. He had been bringing me casseroles and checking on me regularly after Margaret's passing, and knew perfectly well that I was mentally sound. "If you're genuinely concerned about his health, I can call someone," Harry offered. "But if this is just a family disagreement, might be better to resolve it when everyone's calmer." "We're calling the police," Julia threatened, pulling out her phone. "He could be in danger." "I am the police, ma'am." "Retired, but still connected," Harry replied calmly. "Think carefully before making that call. False reports have consequences." Julia lowered her phone, glaring at Harry. Aaron made a few more attempts to get me to answer the door. Then finally they retreated to their car, speeding away with a screech of tires. I texted Harry a quick thank you, which he acknowledged with a thumbs-up emoji, and the message, "Family can be complicated. Call if you need anything." That evening, I sent Aaron a brief text. "I'm willing to meet and talk tomorrow at 3 p.m. at Kingston Coffee Shop. Public place, just us." His reply came an hour later. "Fine, but I'm bringing Julia. She's family too." I considered insisting on meeting Aaron alone first, but decided against it. If Julia was part of the problem, she needed to be part of the conversation. "Okay," I replied. "See you both tomorrow." I spent that night preparing, gathering documents that showed the extent of their financial exploitation, rehearsing what I wanted to say, and trying to anticipate their counter-arguments. I wasn't looking forward to the meeting, but I knew it was necessary. We couldn't move forward, whatever that might look like, without first confronting the truth. Kingston Coffee Shop was a small, locally owned cafe about 15 minutes from my house. I chose it because it was usually quiet in the mid-afternoon and had private corner tables where we could talk without being overheard. I arrived 30 minutes early, ordered a black coffee, and selected a table with a clear view of the entrance. At exactly 3 o'clock, Aaron and Julia walked in. They spotted me immediately, their expressions a mixture of anger and determination as they approached my table. Aaron wore his work suit, while Julia was dressed in designer clothes that I recognized from recent credit card charges. "Hello, Aaron, Julia," I greeted them calmly. "Thank you for coming." "Like we had a choice," Julia snapped, sliding into the booth opposite me. "You've basically declared war on us." Aaron sat beside her, his jaw tight. "I still can't believe you would spy on us in our own home." "I wasn't spying," I clarified. "I brought food over, as I often do on Sundays. You didn't hear me arrive because you were too busy discussing how to manipulate me out of more money for your Bahamas vacation. You took one conversation completely out of context, Aaron insisted. We were just blowing off steam, joking around. It didn't sound like joking to me, I replied, keeping my voice steady. It sounded like you and Julia have been systematically lying to me and using me for money. That's ridiculous, Julia interjected. We've always been grateful for your help. Grateful people don't mock their benefactors behind their backs, I said, looking directly at her. They don't refer to them as that old man who's only good for paying bills. Julia had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but quickly recovered. It was one stupid comment. Are you really going to destroy your relationship with your son over that? It's not about one comment, I explained, pulling out a folder I had prepared. It's about a pattern of behavior. I opened the folder and began laying out credit card statements, highlighted to show their excessive spending. 3-star Michelin restaurants, designer clothes, first-class flights, luxury hotels. None of these are emergencies, which is what the card was supposed to be for. Aaron glanced at the statements, then looked away. We got carried away sometimes, I admit that. But cutting us off completely? Changing the house arrangement? That's extreme, Dad. I didn't cut you off completely, I corrected. I stopped enabling financially irresponsible behavior. There's a difference. So what now? Aaron demanded. What do you want from us? I want you to grow up, I said simply. I want you to take responsibility for your own lives instead of treating me like an ATM. I want you to remember the values your mother and I tried to teach you. And if we don't meet your standards? Julia asked, her tone icy. You'll disown Aaron? Your only child? I'm not disowning anyone, I clarified. I'm establishing boundaries. The house trust gives you a clear path to ownership, but it requires you to demonstrate financial responsibility. My revised will ensures that Aaron will receive an inheritance, but structured in a way that encourages good financial habits. You changed your will? Aaron looked genuinely shocked. Without even discussing it with me? My will is not something I need to negotiate with you, I replied firmly. But yes, I made changes. Some of my estate will now go to charities Margaret supported. The rest will go to you through a structured trust, rather than as a lump sum. This is about control, Julia accused. You can't stand that we were living our own lives without your constant input. This is about consequences, I corrected her. Actions have them. Yours and Aaron's actions have led to these consequences. Aaron, who had been getting increasingly agitated, suddenly slammed his hand on the table, causing several nearby customers to turn and look. You know what? Keep your money, he said bitterly. Keep the house. Keep your precious control. But understand this. When we have children, don't expect to be part of their lives. You've made your choice today. The threat struck deep. The thought of grandchildren I would never know was almost too painful to bear. But I recognized the manipulation tactic for what it was. I hope you do have children someday, I said quietly. And I hope when you do, you'll understand that parenting sometimes means making difficult decisions out of love, not spite. Love? Julia laughed harshly. You call this love? Cutting off your son financially? Humiliating us in public when our cards were declined? I call it a necessary wake-up call, I replied. And from where I sit, you're more upset about losing access to my money than you are about the broken trust between us. We're done here, Aaron announced, standing up. Come on, Julia. Aaron, I said, trying one more time to reach him. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because I believe in you. I believe you can stand on your own feet and build a life you can be proud of. Save your inspirational speeches, he replied coldly. They might work on your banking clients, but I know what this is really about. You're bitter and lonely, and you're punishing us because we have a life and you don't. With that parting shot, he and Julia walked out, leaving me alone at the table with my scattered financial documents and cooling coffee. The weeks that followed were some of the loneliest of my life, worse even than the immediate aftermath of Margaret's death. Then at least I had believed my son loved me and would be there for me. Now, The silence from Aaron was complete. He didn't call, text, or email. Social media offered no glimpses into his life, as Julia had blocked me from all her accounts. I tried to fill my days with activities and routines. I joined a bowling league for seniors at the local recreation center. I volunteered at the hospital where Margaret had received treatment, finding some comfort in helping families going through similar ordeals. I had dinner with Thomas and other friends, accepted invitations to neighborhood barbecues, and adopted a rescue dog named Cooper for companionship. But the absence of my son left a hole that nothing else could fill. I found myself picking up the phone to call him about small things, a habit from before the confrontation, only to remember that he wasn't speaking to me. I would see young fathers with their children in the park and wonder if Aaron and I would ever reconcile, if I had done the right thing or made a terrible mistake. My extended family took sides in the conflict. Margaret's sister Caroline called to tell me she thought I was being too harsh on Aaron and should give the kids a break. My brother David, on the other hand, supported my decision, saying he had watched with concern as Aaron and Julia took advantage of me over the years. "You did what you had to do," David assured me during one of our weekly phone calls. "It hurts now, but in the long run, it's the best thing for everyone, including Aaron." I wanted to believe him, but as summer turned to fall with no word from my son, I began to doubt. Had I been too severe, too abrupt in my response? Should I have tried a gentler approach first? In my lowest moments, I would drive past their house, slowing down but never stopping, looking for signs of how they were managing. The lawn grew shaggy, then was suddenly mowed, suggesting they had finally hired someone after realizing I wouldn't be coming over to do it anymore. A for sale sign appeared briefly in front of the expensive car Aaron had been so proud of, then disappeared, making me wonder if he had found a buyer or changed his mind. I discovered a support group for parents of adult children struggling with financial independence. The stories I heard there helped me understand that my situation was far from unique. Parents of all backgrounds shared similar experiences of adult children who had come to see them as financial resources rather than people with feelings and boundaries of their own. "The hardest part," said Eleanor, a retired teacher whose daughter had maxed out multiple credit cards in her name, "is knowing when helping becomes hurting. When are you supporting them through a rough patch, and when are you preventing them from growing up?" That question haunted me through the fall and into the holiday season, the first I would spend completely alone since Margaret's passing. I sent Aaron and Julia a Christmas card with a brief, heartfelt note expressing my hope for reconciliation, but received nothing in return. I donated to charities in their names and volunteered serving Christmas dinner at a homeless shelter, trying to find meaning in a season that only amplified my sense of loss. 8 months passed, without contact from Aaron or Julia. I had settled into a new normal, one that included weekly bowling, volunteer work at the cancer center, and a surprisingly active social life centered around my local senior center. Cooper, my rescue dog, had become an enthusiastic hiking companion, leading me to discover trails in nearby state parks I had never explored during all my years in the area. Frank, my financial advisor, reported that there had been no issues with the house trust. Property taxes had been paid on time, suggesting that Aaron and Julia were at least meeting the basic requirements to maintain their living situation. I took this as a positive sign, however small. Then, on a rainy Tuesday in November, my phone rang with Aaron's number. I stared at it for several rings, my heart pounding, before finally answering. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Dad?" Aaron's voice sounded different somehow, less confident but more genuine than I remembered. "Is this a good time to talk?" "Of course," I replied, sitting down on my living room sofa, suddenly unsteady. "It's good to hear your voice, son. I was wondering," he said hesitantly, "if we could meet somewhere, just to talk." "I'd like that," I told him, trying to keep the emotion from overwhelming my voice. "The same coffee shop as before?" "Actually," he replied, "could we meet at Riverside Park, near the old boathouse? Around 2 tomorrow, if you're free." We agreed on the time and place, and the call ended quickly, leaving me with a mixture of hope and anxiety. What had prompted this outreach after so many months of silence? Was it genuine? Or was there a new financial crisis motivating the reconnection? The following day dawned clear and cool, a perfect fall afternoon. I arrived at the park early, as was my habit, and sat on a bench overlooking the river where Aaron had learned to fish as a boy. At precisely 2 o'clock, I saw him approaching alone, no sign of Julia. He looked different. His designer suit was gone, replaced by simple jeans and a flannel shirt. His hair was slightly longer, and he seemed to have lost weight. But the most striking change was in his expression, a humility I hadn't seen there in years. "Hi, Dad," he said, sitting beside me on the bench, leaving a respectful distance between us. "Hello, Aaron," I replied. "You're looking well." An awkward silence fell between us. 8 months of unspoken words, making it difficult to know where to begin. "I owe you an apology," Aaron finally said, looking out at the river rather than at me. "A big one." "I'm listening," I said gently. "You were right," he continued. "About everything. Julia and I were taking advantage of you. We were spoiled, entitled, and dishonest. There's no excuse for how we treated you." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "Julia and I separated 3 months ago," he said after a pause. "Not divorced yet, but heading that way. It turns out when there's no more easy money, the relationship gets a lot more challenging." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I had never wished for Aaron's marriage to fail. "Don't be," Aaron replied with a mirthless laugh. "It was long overdue. Once we couldn't afford the lifestyle she wanted to project online, Julia started looking for greener pastures. Last I heard, she's dating some tech executive in San Francisco. How are you doing?" I asked, genuinely concerned. "Better than I deserve," he admitted. "I lost the stockbroker job. Turns out I wasn't very good at it. But I found something else, something I actually enjoy and seem to be decent at. I'm teaching financial literacy at the community college. The irony isn't lost on me." "That sounds like important work," I said, feeling a surge of pride despite everything. "It's entry level, doesn't pay much," Aaron continued. "I had to sell the car and rent out the house. I'm in a small apartment downtown now, taking the bus to work, living within my means for the first time in my adult life. That takes courage," I told him. "Starting over isn't easy at any age." "I keep thinking about Mom," Aaron said, his voice catching slightly. "How disappointed she would have been in how I've been living. How I treated you after she was gone." "Your mother always saw the best in you," I reminded him. "Even when you made mistakes." "I've made a lot of those," he acknowledged, "but I'm trying to learn from them now." We talked for over 2 hours, the afternoon sun warming our faces as Aaron shared the details of his journey over the past 8 months. How the initial anger at me had slowly given way to uncomfortable self-reflection. How Julia's constant demands for more money and status had created tension when they could no longer rely on me to fund their lifestyle. How he had finally started taking responsibility for his own choices after she left. The hardest part was admitting to myself that what I really wanted wasn't the fancy car or the big house, Aaron confessed. It was your approval. But instead of earning it through hard work and honesty, I tried to shortcut the process by pretending to be more successful than I was. "You've always had my love," I told him. "That was never conditional on your success. I know that now." He nodded. But I couldn't see it then. As the sun began to set, Aaron finally asked the question I had been wondering about since his call. "Do you think we could try again? Build a different kind of relationship?" he asked tentatively. "I'm not asking for money or help with the house. I'm just asking for another chance to be your son." "I'd like that very much," I replied, feeling a weight lift from my heart, one day at a time. We parted with a slightly awkward hug, making plans to meet for dinner the following week. As I watched him walk away, I felt cautiously optimistic. This wasn't a fairy tale ending with all problems instantly solved. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But it was a beginning, a chance to establish a healthier relationship based on genuine connection rather than financial dependency. Over the following months, Aaron and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. We started with weekly dinners, sometimes at my house, sometimes at modest restaurants we could both afford. He met Cooper and joined us occasionally for hikes. I visited his small apartment and sat in on one of his financial literacy classes, impressed by his teaching style and the genuine enthusiasm he showed for helping his students avoid the mistakes he had made. The house remained in trust, with Aaron now renting it to a young family while living in his apartment closer to the community college. He never asked for it back, telling me he preferred to know he could support himself on his own income. 6 months into our reconciliation, Aaron invited me to dinner to meet someone. Her name was Diane, a fellow teacher at the college who taught accounting. She was intelligent, down to earth, and clearly cared for Aaron. Most importantly, she seemed to value him for who he was, not what he could provide financially. "She knows everything," Aaron told me privately, while Diane was in the restroom. "About how I treated you, about Julia, about my financial irresponsibility. I wanted to start with complete honesty this time. She seems wonderful," I told him sincerely. "Your mother would have liked her very much." That night, driving home from the restaurant, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought us to this point. The pain of betrayal had been enormous, but it had led to growth that might never have happened otherwise. By standing firm and refusing to continue enabling Aaron's destructive behavior, I had actually given him the opportunity to become the man I always believed he could be. I realize now that there's a profound difference between supporting someone and enabling them. Real support means wanting what's best for their growth, even when that requires difficult choices and temporary pain. Enabling means prioritizing short-term harmony over long-term well-being, avoiding conflict at the cost of allowing harmful patterns to continue. The hardest lesson I've learned is that sometimes love requires standing firm rather than giving in. It means risking relationship for the sake of growth. It means trusting that the temporary pain of confrontation can lead to deeper, more authentic connection in the future. If you're watching this and finding yourself in a similar situation, whether with an adult child, a partner, or a friend who seems to value what you can give more than who you are, I want you to know that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of courage and ultimately an act of love, both for yourself and for the other person. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice for someone you love? Has someone ever set a boundary with you that you later recognized was for your own good? Share your story in the comments below. And if this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. Sometimes the most valuable gift we can give each other is the courage to make difficult choices out of love. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to make the right choices in your own relationships, however difficult they may be.